Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on Friday, November 22nd. And we are back, Arpin and I, from Montreal, where the Canadiens have been practicing again. It's a long week for the Canadiens. They played their last game on, early in the week. Was it on Tuesday? Monday. And they have Monday, and they have their next game against Vegas on Saturday. So, yeah, Tuesday they were off. And then 3 days of practice, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Arpin, considering how the team had gotten finally some sort of rhythm and was accumulating good performances, not necessarily always good results, but still probably their best stretch so far.
Yeah.
Did it come at the right time?
The break? No.
Yeah.
No, it came at a terrible time. They would have preferred, and I think Marty admitted it today after practice, that these breaks are most valuable when you have something to correct. And what the Canadiens did this week was reinforce some of the things they've been building over the last little while. And I would say since probably the game in Minnesota. I think the game in Buffalo to some extent, that was a win, but still the game in Minnesota that they lost 3-0. So that's 3 games ago. You're seeing a version of this team that looks something like what Marty has been preaching since day one. And why did it take that long? Who knows? But you see a team that's more responsible with the puck, that all the buzzwords that Marty uses, trust the forecheck, start the ozone, all that stuff, they're doing that stuff. So
without being too tentative with the puck either. Which is also
I think that in Edmonton, that's what we saw, right? Against Edmonton, that tentativeness was starting to go, and so you would have liked to have been able to build on that, which is what Marty tried to do in practice this week. So, because the game against Edmonton honestly was their best game, their best 40 minutes of the season. Let's say the first period was not great, but after that, they corrected themselves, and I think played their best 40 minutes of hockey we've seen them play all season. So there was a connectedness to their game. And in an ideal world, you want to play right away. That's not the case. Pretty rare that one team faces another team who has played twice since you last played. That's rare in an NHL season. That Vegas has coming off a back-to-back. They played in Toronto on Wednesday, in Ottawa on Thursday, 1 loss, 1 win. They're going to play the third and 4 nights on Saturday, and Montreal hasn't played since Monday. So that's an extremely rare situation in the NHL, which obviously the emphasis is going to be on pouncing on a tired team. We've seen this before.
Yeah, but I don't know which team really has the edge, because you can be a bit rusty,
Absolutely. So that's why I think it's interesting to look at how Marty spent this week, because you don't want that rust. And every other time Marty has had a break in the schedule like this since he became coach of the Canadiens, it's been pretty easy to plan, because there's been like one specific area of the Canadiens game that needed fixing. And, earlier this season, there was the defensive zone. Last season, there was a break in the schedule when the forecheck was a complete mess and needed to be addressed. And so there's oftentimes, I don't know if it's been every time, but it's rare. I can't remember a time since Marty became coach where they hit a break in the schedule and they were playing well. They didn't really have anything to correct. They want to reinforce some of the things they were doing well. So, I was able to make it to practice. You obviously were under the weather, but I was able to make it to practice all week. And so the way Marty described it today is 100% true. On Wednesday, it was defensive stuff, and it wasn't defensive zone stuff. It was forwards tracking back, pinching attacks at the blue line, making their blue line tough to cross, sort of more kind of neutral zone, rush coverage-ish, transition kind of defense. Wrote about that this morning in The Athletic, how the Canadiens against Edmonton, the forwards did an excellent job getting back and helping their defense and allowing their defense to stand up on the blue line and get more aggressive in the neutral zone, which is just a domino effect, right? So that they worked on that on Wednesday, even though they did it really well on Monday. Thursday, individual stuff, a lot of skill work. Marc Bureau was there before practice, 9:45 a.m. on the ice with all the centers, plus Newhook, plus Doc, plus Yuri Slavkovsky, who said afterwards when I said, "Are you going to be turning into a center anytime soon?" He's like, "No, I'm going to take faceoffs on the PP." And Nick Suzuki was standing right next to him with the scrum gathering around him, and he just kind of side-eyed him and looked over to him. He's like, "Yeah, that's not happening." But anyhow, good initiative on his part to go out and work on his face-off. Frankly, sure. I think every forward should work on face-offs because at some point or another, you're going to be in there, and it might be a critical situation. But yeah, so that was Thursday, and then today, obviously, you were there working on offensive stuff, and offensive stuff similar to the defensive stuff was focused on the neutral zone and how to get into the zone more effectively, how to identify holes in the opposing team's defense and exploit them. And I thought his answer to your question was really good in that sense, in terms of finding more areas to take advantage of their speed. And I think that's what the neutral zone is about. And not only that, but that Marty considers the neutral zone the top of the circles in the defensive zone to the top of the circles in the offensive zone. Who knew? We didn't know that either.
Yeah. My question was about, because I feel like what we've seen so far from the Canadiens this year is not a team that's especially fast. Traditionally we used to hear the cliche about the Montreal Canadiens, and it was that it was a fast and small team, and they've gotten slightly bigger over the years, but they don't seem a lot faster since the beginning of the season. So you can look at individual guys and say, well, Josh Anderson is exploiting his speed a lot, but you've got guys, for example, like Nick Suzuki, who's got a very up and down pace level from one game to the next. Sometimes there are games where you say, oh, he's got his legs and he seems like he's flying. Other games, he seems like he's almost slow. It seems to vary a lot. Alex Newhook, supposed to be a very fast guy, but has not been able to really exploit his speed probably as often as he would like so far this season. So you could identify guys individually, but my question to Marty was more in the sense of a collective aspect to it, because it's very much about pace, about being able to build your speed. It's one thing to be able to have, a great cruising speed where at full stride how fast you are, but Marty keeps saying, well, pick your spots on when to be fast, because sometimes you need to slow down the game. And there's been so much information taught to these players in the last couple of years that there's always been this risk in my mind that they were overflowed with information and they would start thinking too much on the ice. And you could see early on in the season, there were games where they were almost a bit paralyzed because they were thinking a lot. They were also very mindful of not making mistakes. And when you don't want to make mistakes, when you can either get hesitant or too precautious, but in both cases, it doesn't translate into you carrying the puck in full speed and just be very flowing into the way that you create speed, you create offense. So in that sense, all that play and all that work in the neutral zone is something that could translate into seeing a team that's playing faster and that visibly just also faster on the ice, because that's where you generate your speed. So it's not only going to be your first couple of strides, and it's not while you're moving the puck down low. It's mainly your transition game. Can you build speed there and put the defense on their heels? And we have not seen the Canadiens do that since the beginning of the season. But if they're effective and if they manage to be to do what they try to accomplish in the neutral zone, then we should start seeing a team that's faster.
Well, one thing the Canadiens do that's interesting, and I think Marty has to find other areas of the ice or other ways to create situations like this. One thing I've noticed they do this year is they're coming out of their zone. They have a winger at center ice, and usually that winger is there to chip pucks deep, basically. But they've taken to passing to that winger and having the center time it so that he hits an area just behind that winger, and the winger just taps it back to him, and then he takes off, and he has like a running start with the puck. Really kind of creative way to do exactly what you just described, like to create areas where you can take advantage of your speed. And that's something I think the Canadiens have done all season, but more of late, just because they're they're not dumping pucks out of their zone as often anymore. They're not desperate to get out as often as they were before. So having more of a controlled exit allows you to do things like that. And if Marty can, and that seems like something that's definitely a coaching move. Like that's a set play coming on an exit that the Canadiens have pulled off relatively frequently and usually leads to a clean entry and some time in the offensive zone. So if you could find other areas of the ice where you can pull off stuff like that and really give your guys an advantage speed wise, I think that's what Marty's talking about in terms of the stuff that they're working on right now, improving the way they attack the offensive zone from the neutral zone, and creating situations where they could just get in, but not just get in the offensive zone and leave immediately, but get in and either have an odd man opportunity or get in and start their offensive zone play and tiring out the other team and just creating some momentum for maybe even the next line to take advantage of. So, and this is these are the kind of the luxury items on the Canadiens to-do list. So like it's telling that Marty believes that their defensive zone play is good enough that he can focus on this, that their transition defense is good enough, their rush coverage is good enough, and not to say that he's ignoring those things. He worked on those things on Wednesday, but he always says you can only fix one thing at a time. So when you spend a week working on three different things, gives you a sense of where he thinks his team's at in terms of each of those things, frankly, because if one of them was super problematic, they probably would have spent 3 days in a row working on that thing. So we'll see on Saturday what happens. Like this is a situation where, and as you said, the Canadiens might be at a disadvantage because they've been off for so long, but really with the things that they've been prioritizing, they should have the energy to take advantage of a tired team, and as good as they are, they're the best team in the Pacific Division. They're a legit Stanley Cup contender. They're the more talented team, but so really interesting test. I mean, more interesting to me than, Edmonton was an interesting test just because of their makeup, and the challenges the Canadiens had defensively. And so now I think they proved a point with that win. This would be proving another point, where they just have a heightened awareness of situational advantages. We talked about it in a previous episode, but you go back to that game against the Kings when they were facing a tired team, turned the puck over 14 times in the first period. That changed against Columbus, where they really took it to them and took advantage of a tired team. And now they're in a similar situation against a much more difficult opponent. So it really ramps it up another notch to the Columbus game, where can the Canadiens start a game and stick to their advantages, stick to their strengths, and really force Vegas to play a very difficult, taxing style early on that could eventually pay off, like it did against Columbus, that can pay off in the third period, and be patient with it and stick to it. And so that'll mean like putting pucks deep. That'll mean like all the disciplined things that the Canadiens have been doing that aren't as much fun as dangling guys or making nice passes or whatever. Those are the things that are going to make this team effective. And we saw it against Columbus. Like that was a close game. It finished 5-1, but that was a close game until the third, and the Canadiens pulled away in the third period because they were the fresher team. That's the formula against Vegas, except you're doing it against a much, much, much better opponent. So pretty interesting test.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because now they've had 3 days of practice, 4 days in total, like in between games. It's the second time in October they had 3 days, also 1 day of
Hmm.
rest and 2 days of practice. So they've had these two breathers in the schedule so far, which was useful to let also guys nurse little bumps and bruises here and there. That's good, but the the other the other part of this is that now they've probably played less games than most of the other teams, and they're going to the schedule is the same length for everybody, right? So you have to those days off that you've got, well, later on in the season, maybe you wish you had them
Well, this has
because
actually allowed the other teams to catch up to them. They were ahead in games on a lot of teams, and now they're pretty much even. Like more like look at if you look at the division.
yeah.
I mean, Tampa still hasn't played as many games as the Canadiens, but now they've played as many games as Ottawa, as Detroit, and Buffalo. So the three teams are kind of in direct competition with. They've played two fewer than Boston and one fewer than Toronto and Florida, but I think for a while they had played a lot more games than people. So this allowed the rest of the league to kind of catch up to them, or at least their division.
Yeah, it's a good point. And when you look at the schedule that's coming up, of course, Vegas is a tough opponent, but the next month and until the Florida trip over Christmas, they're going to face a few opponents that are really in their wheelhouse if they want to be in the mix,
Hmm.
and if they don't want to be bottom dwellers, because don't. I mean, these standings right now are completely nuts. You have 9 teams that are at 500 or under in the Eastern Conference. Usually, in a regular season, a normal season, you'd have between 4 and 6 of those teams. Now we got 9 of them, and that includes obviously the Boston Bruins, who just fired their coach and won their first game under Joe Sacco. Um, but I think for the Canadiens, who right now they're just as close to being in the mix or to a playoff spot as they would be from being like a lottery team. So I think that situation of having 9 teams that are at 500 or below is not going to last forever. I really wonder where the Canadiens are going to position themselves. And the next month, when you look at the fact that they're going to be facing Utah, they're going to be facing Columbus again, they're going to have some really beatable opponents. Nashville in early December. They're going to have the the Ducks on the 9th of December, and then Buffalo before Christmas on the 17th. A couple of games against Detroit too. So all those half of those games that they've got to play until Christmas. So in the next month, are against teams that are really in their bracket, and it's going to be a test for the next month to see how opportunistic will they be and how consistent they can be in the gains that they made in their style of play, and they're looking for that consistency in how they apply their defensive zone schemes and everything that they've been trying to build offensively. It's going to be a good test facing weaker teams to get a maximum of points, because if they don't capitalize on that after Christmas is going to be a whole other story.
Well, that's the thing is that so to me they have what? They have 15 games before Christmas.
Let me count that.
4, 7, 11, 15. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, 15.
yeah.
To me, they have to win like 9 of them minimum. Um, because not only do they have to be, because like when you say they're closer to, they're just as close to, like they are a lottery team right now. By points percentage, they're
Well,
fourth
they're
worst.
last in the Eastern
They're
Conference. You bet
fourth
they are.
worst in the NHL. They would be picking
Yeah,
fourth overall based on points percentage right now.
yeah,
So yes, they're 3 points out of a playoff spot, but there's a whack of teams between them and the Bruins. It's so there's an opportunity there. Like the good thing for the Canadiens and the way they've started and for their own goals is that the rest of the conference has basically pooped their pants to the same degree as the Canadiens have. It's
yeah,
like Boston be leading the charge, but the three famous rebuilding teams in the division with them, Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa, can't seem to get out of that phase where they're on the cusp of exiting the rebuild, but don't seem to know how to do it, which is a phase the Canadiens have to avoid at all costs. Um, Philly's right there. Pittsburgh's
Ottawa was right there, and they lost 3 in a row. It's
yeah,
like, man, it's like
no,
they find new ways to mess themselves up.
and these are all cautionary tales for what the Canadiens are doing because the Canadiens are not there yet. They're not at a point where every team like the way people are reacting in Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa right now is probably the way it's going to happen in Montreal next year if this continues in the same way. It's not quite they're not quite there this year, but still cautionary tale. Like they don't want it. They need to find a way to avoid that. But they need to hit Christmas not just at 500. Let's say they need to hit Christmas with a cushion, right? Because Christmas is a slog. Like they come out of the Christmas break. They have an afternoon game in Florida. They play the next day in Tampa. They play in Vegas on New Year's Eve. Then they go to Chicago for some weird reason. Then they go back to Denver to play Colorado back to back after an 8 p.m. Eastern start in Chicago to play a 7 p.m. Eastern game in Colorado, which is 5 p.m. local. Like, I mean, this is just
Brutal.
maniacal scheduling. Like, I mean, it's just absolutely insane scheduling. So,
Yeah.
um, so before they hit that stretch of 5 games, just a total mess. They need to build a cushion. So yeah, I agree with you. Like these next 15 games are going to tell us a lot about what the season's going to look like, and I don't think they're all that consequential one way or the other in the sense that it's not the end of the world if they make a push and they find themselves, you know, in a grouping that could conceivably dream of a playoff spot. Just like it won't be the end of the world and might actually be beneficial to them if they stay right where they are and are in a prime position to get a high draft pick again. So um, but to me, I think, and I've always said I cover this team based on what they tell me they want to be. Um, so I'm covering this team based on what they tell me they want to be, and they're looking more like the team they said they wanted to be. But now is the time to go and prove it and actually be that team. And if they're not, then the rebuild might benefit, but I don't know if the individual players and the coach and all the people who are on the team will benefit from feeling that failure that
Mm-hmm.
they did not accomplish what they set out to accomplish.
Because when you look at those other teams that are at 500 or below, and I'll exclude Boston, which is in the situation of its own.
It's
I
temporary,
can,
yeah.
yeah, uh, Buffalo, the Islanders, Columbus, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Ottawa. All those teams, are the Canadiens really that much worse than them?
No,
Not really.
no.
So it's going to be they could come out on top of almost all of those teams if they play to their full potential. So if they fumble and they end up, and they stay where they are, well, we're going to be talking at length about James Higgins and about Matthew Schaefer and Porter Martone and those guys, Michael
Hmm.
Misa. But it's as strange as it sounds. After the first month of the season that they had, and all the way they were also lost with their game, the chance of being competitive in that conference is still very real. So
Oh, totally, totally. And I asked Marty that a while ago. Do you feel fortunate that you're in this mess, but so is the whole rest of your division? And he just looked at me and he said, okay, first off, yes, I do feel fortunate, but we need to focus on ourselves. We can't worry about what everyone else is doing, and that's what they've done. And so even if they lose that game tomorrow against Vegas, um, this is because that could happen. They're this excellent hockey team that they're facing. But this is to me this 15 game stretch is going to show me if this team is ready to mature or not. And are they going to take the lessons that they've learned so far this season and apply them and actually turn them into results? Or will they continue treading water? Or will they take another step back and have another little mini crisis and have to fix something else or whatever? So, you're supposed to start the season on time. Mature teams do that. The Canadiens didn't. So this is another opportunity for them to show that they've taken a step in their maturity, the step that they themselves preached prior to the season that they were ready to take. Now's the time to take it. So it's I don't want to put too much on it, but and as I said, it's not all that consequential in the grand scheme of things. But I think it'll be telling. It'll tell us a lot about this team these next 15 games and how close they are to being a serious team.
Yeah. Among the things that were discussed over those 3 days of practice, there was the use of Kaiden Guhle being moved from the right side to the left side. Guhle said that it came at the right time for him. Following this injury that made him miss a few games. I mean, he started off the season pretty well considering he didn't have a training camp.
Yeah.
He played very well right off the gate, but after that injury, came back and he was a lot more hesitant. So he went through a bit of a slump, and in order to help him find his game, Stéphane Robida and Martin Saint-Louis decided to move him back to the left side and to switch with Mike Matheson, who for the last few games has been playing on the right. Very interesting move because it's been it has worked. It doesn't seem to have affected Matheson's play all that much, playing on the right side. But for Guhle, they thought that it would mean less thinking for him, even though he's played a ton on the right side since last season. Putting him back on his natural side would enable him to think less and make sure that he's in the right spot most of the time. And
it was really to help his touches. It was to help his puck touches.
Yeah, offensively, we feel as though he's been a lot more dynamic in that sense.
Yeah, and he remembers the day that he moved to the right side. It was at home against Edmonton last season, so that was on January 13th. He hadn't played a game on the left since then, and so he admitted that at first it took him some time to actually had to readjust to playing on the left. And this is kind of a hockey nerdy question, or observation or conversation I had with him. But so I asked him about that, and he's like, and actually, he said, like on the blue line, it was tough because I was preserving my space, and on the right side that's what you want to do, but on the left side that's the last thing you want to do, and I found myself doing it, and it was causing problems, and I'm like just nodding my head, yeah, okay, and then we finished the conversation. I go home, I'm listening to it, I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? What preserving your space? What does that even mean? So
that's a Martyism to him, I guess.
It might be, but I think it. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it does sound like a Martyism. So anyhow, So he was like, so I went the next time I saw him, I was like, hey, last time we talked, you mentioned preserving your space, and I came to the conclusion I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, what does that mean? And this was actually interesting. Like, so you would think that a lefty on the right side should naturally cut to the middle of the ice and put yourself in a position to shoot, right? That's what I would think. That's like the primary advantage of playing on your offside as a defenseman is you can take the puck off the wall and go to the middle of the ice and let go of a shot much easier than you can when you're on your strong side.
Yeah.
But when he plays on the right, preserving his space means not doing that, because oftentimes the opposing team's winger is attacking that area of the ice. So if you actually stay kind of in the corner, you have time to you have a little, like a half second more to make a play by avoiding that winger who's probably assuming that you're going to cut middle. And he said on the left side, you don't want to preserve your space. You don't want to stay in that corner. You do want to walk it out to the middle as much as you can, and either let go of a shot or send it back deep. But you want to take it off the wall and create space. Whereas on the right side, you want to preserve space. So I don't know if that enlightened anyone, but it did me. I learned something from that. But that's kind of
Yeah, but
it
it's
gives you
all
a window
about.
into Kaiden Guhle and how he thinks about the game. Like that was his main thing that he had trouble with moving back to the left side.
But preserving his space, it's preserving time, right? In order to make a play without being on your back end.
Yeah,
It's yeah,
time, space, they're interchangeable. I mean, it's really yeah, it's 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 basically it's basically not playing into the what the opposing, you know, defense. It's so but these are just the types of little adjustments that he's had to make, but he's been I mean that game against Edmonton on Monday, like we recorded on Monday or Sunday night actually. Um that's one of the best games I've ever seen him play. Like flat out. and
yeah.
and he missed half the first period, blocking an Evan Bouchard shot with his hand. Um,
Yeah, and
super.
I'll say something. Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that the Canadians played their best 40 minutes after a sluggish first period. You didn't use the word sluggish, but I think that first period we need to take into account the fact that they lost goalie for half that period, and
Yeah, but they were
they
sloppy. They were
they were
sloppy.
they were
They were sloppy
sloppy,
with the
and
puck. Yeah.
they were sloppy with the puck. They were saved a lot by Samuel Montembeault, and they had
Mhm.
three PK, three penalties to kill. All the
Yeah.
while with
And Zach
with
Hyman had an open net that he whiffed on. The ref blew the whistle early on a goal. They got a lot of good breaks in that period.
yeah, I didn't think that it was all that horrible, but because 5-on-5, I thought that they really limited the Oilers' chances, but it was not as good as the last two. But anyway, I get what they were saying after the game. The players took exception to that first period, and they can use it as an example of not being satisfied and say, "Well, we're not playing 60 minutes yet." But I take into account the fact that Gooley was not there, and in his absence, well, the other guys held the fort. You know, Jacky, Struble, and the other ones. Um, Another one, someone else who's been discussed during those 3 days is Lucas Condotta and the rest of the fourth line. Had today, Yoel Army had an interesting line when he compared the line that he's playing with right now with Heineman and Condotta in terms of style of play to when he was playing with Eric Stahl and Corey Perry during the playoffs in 2021. And it's interesting because it's a heavy line. It's really Western Conference type of heavy cycling and forecheck, and maybe not necessarily producing a ton of offense, but making sure that when they're on the ice, the puck's not in their own end. And in
Mhm.
that sense, I can definitely recognize the similarity. And it's been a pleasant surprise so far to see those three guys together. I'm not sure how long it's going to last with the pending return of Raphael Harvey-Pinard and soon enough Patrick Laine. I don't know if it bodes very well for Lucas Condotta's future, but honestly, that guy has really entered the bell following his call up because this is a very, very reliable fourth line.
Yeah, well, they're reliable in the sense that yeah, they play in the offensive zone, and I was talking to Emil Heineman the other day, and I remember when he got traded to Montreal when the Tyler Toffoli trade happened. Um, Hell of a trade, by the way, in retrospect, because Heineman looks like he's going to be a player. I don't think he's going to be a star, but looks like he's going to be a player for this team, and
Yeah,
they got the first out of it, right? So, um, but at that time, I spoke to his general manager in Leksand, Sweden, which is where he was playing, and at that time, he was, I guess, 19 or so at the time. Um, he was playing on Leksand's fourth line, and his GM mentioned that in the whole Swedish Hockey League, our fourth line has the best expected goals percentage of any fourth line in the league. We have the best fourth line in the league, and he's a big reason why. And basically, that line played the way this line plays now:
yeah,
heavy on the forecheck, lots of speed, possession time in the offensive zone, puck 200 feet away from your net most of the time. And so Heineman has experience in this role, the specific role, which is why I think he's taken to it so well. It's part of the reason why. Like he understands the mentality necessary, and he understands what his specific skill set brings to that line and how it allows it to play that way. He has to be first in on pucks. He has to be physical. He's the fastest guy on the line, and he's the most physical guy on the line, even though Condotta's pretty physical himself. But all of them embracing their separate parts of what makes the line good is I think a big reason why the line is good. But yeah, I think it's worth talking about what's going to happen when the line has to be broken up.
Yeah.
Because my curiosity is, and again, not to always bring it back to Christian Dvorak, and I know I've become like the president of the Christian Dvorak fan club, but it's is Christian Dvorak going to be able to fill that role on a fourth line eventually, as well as Condotta has? And I think that's a legitimate question because Dvorak has his own strengths, but what Condotta does are not necessarily Dvorak's strengths. He's an okay forechecker, but he's not like Condotta.
No, he's not. No, that's true. That's true,
Yeah.
and maybe that's it's. They're going to. Marty was talking today about Brendan Gallagher, and he said that Gallagher didn't have to always be the guy in front of the net; that he could do other things. So it's not always the same player that's going to be F1. Um, but I think that if Dvorak ends up centering a fourth line, and if the goal is to have a fourth line that spends that much time in the offensive zone, he Dvorak will have to chip in as being the F1 on occasion.
Hmm.
Uh, but his wingers are effective in that sense. And I
Yeah.
expect Heineman to continue being one. So uh, and I wonder if it's going to be how long this situation is going to last too. I expect Heineman to have uh, additional responsibilities down the road. It was intriguing to me to learn today that he was taking part in the penalty kill meetings, even though he's played 11 seconds of shorthand hockey so far this year, and
Hmm.
yet he's taking part in those meetings. So I think that he's in the mix eventually to be added to the PK. That would be an interesting development, but it
Would
tells
allow
me
them to
that
take Suzuki completely off.
yeah,
Yeah.
or Dvorak if Dvorak is moved.
Or Dvorak if Dvorak is moved. Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. So
But HP could also play on the PK eventually.
yeah, but
Yeah.
those are two wingers, and we just mentioned Dvorak and Suzuki who are centermen.
Right.
That's
Well,
going to
Suzuki
be
generally replaces Anderson when he's in the box, right? Like that's basically when he gets his PK
yeah,
time. No, seriously, like so
yeah, you're
far,
right.
that's when he plays,
Yeah,
more or less. And so you don't need a centerman to play that role. But but yeah, I think it's
but
worth
if Dvorak was to if you have a line of Armia, Dvorak, and Heineman, it's not going to play the same way. But it doesn't matter if it plays differently. The question is, would they manage to be effective?
that's it. Would they? Yeah, they could be effective in a different way.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think Dvorak was effective when he was on the fourth line. That was kind of my whole thing with him is that I was judging him as a fourth line center, and I thought he was pretty darn good as a fourth line center. But so what? Am I wrong to assume that when Liney comes back, Marty will essentially go to what he thought his top two lines would be to start the season, or is the current experiment continue in a way and because it's going so well, and who knows, like we have no idea when Lionel will be back. But let's say, for argument's sake, because next week they have a back-to-back, Tuesday at home to Utah, Wednesday in Columbus. While it would be great to have, actually, that'd be pretty cool if Lionel played his first game against Columbus, but in Columbus, that would be cool.
Yeah,
But
that'd be cool.
but
Yeah.
probably not. Listen, he hasn't practiced yet. I'd be
No,
shocked if that was the case. Then you have another back-to-back Saturday afternoon in New York, Sunday afternoon in Boston, and then you get to a regular schedule where you have Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, then a Monday game and a Thursday game. So let's say, just for argument's sake, that he comes back sometime in the first week of December. Let's suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, how do you
HP
ha-
will be back by then.
HP will have to be back. Well, yeah. Well,
It's
yeah.
14
He'll
days.
have to be back. 14-day limit. Yeah. So he'll have to be back.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other can of worms. Like, what do they do with HP? They don't really need to do anything because they have an extra roster spot. When Liney comes back, then they'll need to do something, and so um, that's when it gets tricky. And that's when Heineman's situation becomes really complicated because he's not waiver exempt, right? Or he is waiver exempt rather. Sorry, he's not waiver eligible, and that will be an interesting test of Kent Hughes's refusal to put people on waivers at risk of losing them
Yeah.
because Heineman's an effective player for this team. Pizzetta can't get in the lineup. Do you put Pizzetta on waivers?
I
I
honestly, if
would.
there's no move, if there's no trade and no additional injury, I think that's what's going to happen.
That's probably
At
what's
some
going to happen. So
Pizzetta will end up on waivers, and they would have maybe HP as a 13 forward because
yeah,
Heineman is
probably.
playing in a way that you don't sending him down just because he's waiver eligible, waiver exempt would send a wrong message.
Of course it
You know,
would. Of course it would. But they've done it in the past. But I think this would be the test of what phase they're in.
yeah,
If you're not in a phase where you're just collecting assets, but you're actually trying to build a team, there's no argument to be made that the team is better served with Heineman and Laval than in the lineup. There's absolutely no way you can make that argument. And so we'll see what happens. But otherwise, am I wrong in my assumption that when Laine comes back, we'll see Doc go back to center, we'll see Caulfield go back with Slavkovsky and Suzuki, we'll see the lines that we expected to see at the beginning of the season. Do you think that'll happen, or do you think the current success or the current way that they're playing will A, continue that long, and B, if it does, Marty won't want to touch it and he'll have to come up with something different?
I think that it'll mean Kirby Doc back at center.
Yeah.
That's my expectation. I won't assume right away that Caulfield will necessarily go back to the first line with Suzuki. It's always been Marty's intention, but I don't know if he's going to do it right away. So there'll be a group of 6 forwards, and he'll come up with 2 lines out of those 6 forwards. But I don't think that for all the great services that Jake Evans has provided, not only him for the team, but also in helping Caulfield connecting with his defensive game probably better
Mm-hmm.
than he has so far in the past. That's great. That's not lost. But if you want to go further, you reach a point where you have to go. You have to see what you got with Doc at center. We've had multiple debates on this platform about that. I thought that they could wait for a certain amount of time, but when Liney comes back, they're going to be forced. They're going to be at crossroads and going to be time at some point to do it and see what they've got and bring him back. Jake Evans in the bottom 6. It's going to strengthen the team too. So
Well,
it's a
100%.
yeah.
My only
So
my only my only concern is that what we're seeing with Doc, and it's worth mentioning, Doc this week was pretty honest about where he's at, and he kind of mentioned how he feels he's playing safe, that his needs in the back of his mind to some degree, like he didn't flat out say that, but that when he said, I think I'm playing safe, that's what he meant. That he needs to kind of just let go and play the game freely without any concern. So that's still a thing. We're 20 games into the season. I think Kirby Doc has realized that we're significantly into the season at this point. I can't be playing safe anymore. I need to be making plays. I need to play the way I can. And Marty did that whole thing where Kirby, when he looks at the game through a toilet paper roll, is not nearly as good as when his aperture is wide open and he's viewing the whole ice and he sees all the possibilities, and said when that version of Kirby is special and it's still there. He's like, it's still there. I'm convinced it is. We're going to get it out of him. But he clearly is not there yet. Maybe he will be between now and Linus' return. But if he's not, Now you have a guy who's trying to figure that out. And if you put him on a line with another guy who's going to be going through the exact same process in all likelihood in Patrick Laine, who hasn't played a lot of hockey recently, it's not fair to expect Patrick Laine to walk right into a top six role and start pumping goals in. Like, it's just not realistic. And I think the Canadiens will have an expectation that the same expectation they had for Doc will apply to Laine, if not more so, with everything he's been through. Um, is that a good? Is it good to have two guys searching for themselves on the same line? So that might influence whether they put Doc back at center or not. Right at that point, like if he hasn't found his game and he has not,
No,
he's
but
still playing
I don't see
safe.
but I don't see what's the alternative. I mean, the fact that Doc is playing center or wing doesn't seem to have any bearing on his mental approach to the game, and the fact that he feels like he's playing safe, that he knows that he should hold on to the puck more and and try more plays instead of resulting always to, well, trust himself to make more plays. Whether he's a winger or a centerman, he knows that's what he needs to do. So I'm not sure if Laine coming back and Doc being brought back to center is really going to influence that. It's true that it's two
Well,
guys
it's just, you just don't
that
want
go
two
through.
guys going through the same thing. You don't want two hesitant guys on the same line. Is all I'm saying. That's my main point. Is that it has nothing to do with Doc at center. Like, moving Doc back to center naturally infers that he would play with Laine, which I think was the plan all along.
Yeah, but that's
It's
why I said I'm not. I see six guys on the top six, but how you mix that, your guess is as good as mine. But I'll point you out something else though. You got Liney, Doc, Suzuki, Caulfield, Slaff, and Newhook. That's your
mhm.
top six guys. There's no Selke Trophy winners in there. In terms of balancing, I mean, you've got good offensive potential, but for a team that wants to make sure that they're eliminating, um, plays that feed the other team's offense, that limit turnovers and mistakes, this is not a top six that would be very savvy defensively. So I wonder if keeping a guy who's got more of a defensive conscience in there and trying to stretch that into three units, and then I'm sort of walking back on what I was saying earlier regarding Jake Evans. But thinking about it further, I wonder if you reintroduce Liney slowly by using him on the third line, and if you keep Evans as a possibility on the top six, or at least with significant minutes, maybe you could manage to keep your top six or an elevated top nine as maybe more defensively aware, because those six guys together, yeah, they might provide offense, but I mean, Suzuki has made marginal improvements defensively. Caulfield has gotten better, but it's not
Mhm.
Mark Stone. Slav is not great defensively. Doc's not great defensively, and Laine is far from that. Far from that.
I
He's
don't
going
think
to be
Slav's. I
probably
don't think
the.
Slav's. I don't think Slav's an issue defensively, personally.
I'm not saying he's an issue. I'm just saying
Well,
he's
he's
not
had.
great. It's
I
it's
don't know. I think
not
he's pretty darn good for a 20-year-old. I think he's a good defensive player. I don't know. I disagree with you on that. I think he's a
okay.
good. I think he's a responsible defensive player. Problem is offense. His last problem right now is offense.
Yeah.
I don't see any issue with him defensively at all. Like, I think he's been good, but he
My
needs to
point
get it
is
together
that Patrick.
offensively.
Yeah, it's just my point is Patrick Laine is not going to arrive in there in that mix and be an asset defensively.
Yeah,
So
but I don't know.
so they have to. I think that if they want to make sure that they're playing a very responsible brand of hockey, uh, they might build their lines accordingly.
No, I don't think they would do that. That would mean taking Josh Anderson off the like. That would mean breaking up the Anderson Gallagher combo, basically. I mean, if you're playing Laine on a third line, then Anderson has to go down to the fourth. I don't think they're breaking up Anderson and Gallagher anytime soon.
Mm.
Um, I don't see that happening. I think that's a bit of galaxy braining. Like, maybe they might be forced into something like that eventually, but I think at first, let's not like. I don't know. I wouldn't
Well,
look at.
Galaxy Brain isn't that our specialty?
Yeah, a little bit. But maybe my whole thing about playing Doc and Line as they're trying to figure things out. So maybe that's Galaxy Braining it too. Like I don't know. Like it's maybe it'll be fine.
Yeah,
But it's I mean Doc saying what he did today was kind of an eye opener because I really didn't think I don't understand what it's like to tear your MCL and ACL or whatever ligaments he tore. It was all kind of nebulous, but I don't know what it's like to go through an injury like that and go through surgery and rehab and everything that does and want to avoid doing that again. I don't know what that's like between your ears. This was Doc admitting that it does live between his ears, and I guess different players view it in different ways. Um, I don't know to what extent Liney's going to have that hesitancy in his game or that thought in the back of his mind. Maybe he won't at all. Who
yeah,
knows? Maybe once Doc has passed it, he's past it and it'll be fine. So, you know, let's see. But I do think both of us to some extent were galaxy braining, and I think ultimately what Marty's going to do is like I had a plan going into the year. I'd like to see what that plan gives us. Like that's what I believe is going to happen at that point, which would mean putting Caulfield back with Suzuki and Slavkov. It's the perfect pretext to do the things that Marty knows is going to happen at some point anyway. Doc is going to go back to center at some point anyway. Caulfield is going to go back with Suzuki at some point anyway. It provides the perfect trigger for those
yeah,
things to just organically happen. And so, like when he thought he had a line eight Doc, Newhook second line, and a Caulfield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky second line, first line rather. Let's just roll with that and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But in theory, the Canadiens would be much improved because yes, having Jake Evans and Christian Dvorak as your bottom two centers, you could do way worse than that. And
yeah.
especially the Evans, I mean, Dvorak has been fine between Anderson and Gallagher, but I think that line was a hair better when Evans was between the two of them. And Dvorak, I think Dvorak's been fine, but he's the further up the lineup he goes, the less fine he is. Because like when I say he's fine, I'm
You mean
comparing him
Evans or Dvorak?
Dvorak.
Oh yeah, okay.
Dvorak is only as good as the average player at that spot, right? So like if he's a fourth line center, I gauge him based on other fourth line centers and say, okay, if I would pick between him and this fourth line center or that fourth line center, which one would I rather have? And I think more often than not, I'm taking Christian Dvorak, like based on other
For
fourth line
sure. Yeah,
centers
yeah.
around the league. So, but if he's
No
your
doubt
third line
about it.
center, and definitely if he's your second line center, then that calculus is completely different, right? So it's this team is best served Suzuki, Doc, Evans, Dvorak. And so maybe that's what'll happen.
Maybe. So you were referring to Doc's, knee, and it was both the ACL and the MCL that were
Yeah, but there
torn.
was some. I think he denied. I think there was some confusion about that. I don't think I think he strained one of them and tore one of them. I don't know which is which, but anyhow, there was some confusion about that
Okay.
eventually.
Because a torn MCL would not have made him miss the whole season. The ACL had to be,
Yeah, so it had to be the
yeah,
ACL that was torn. I don't think he tore both.
yeah.
Anyhow, speaking of that, let's do Future Friday. That's where we're
Yes.
at. Future Friday. Future Friday.
All right. So today for Future Friday, we're going to do something slightly different. One of our subscribers, Ryan, sent us a suggestion earlier this week that, instead of focusing on one prospect in particular for this week, we would take a look at the recent Core 4 project that was published by TSN this week. Work done by our friend Craig Button and Chris Peters also.
Mhm.
It's a joint work from those two guys.
Before we start
Chris,
this, can I just bring something up
sure.
just before we get going? Because I'm actually looking at the page. It's on tsn.ca. Right next to the Canadiens graphic of their core four, which is Cole Caulfield, Ivan Demidov, Juraj Slafkovsky, and Lane Hudson. There's an ad from the Montreal Canadiens. The ad reads, The future is bright. Be ready. Season tickets waiting list. And there's a picture of Demidov, 2024 first round selection. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at this, and I saw this go by on Twitter like last week or something. And I'm thinking, like, okay, this is a team, like, what was their entire messaging going into the season? That they were ready to be in the mix, quote unquote, trademark, hashtag, that they were going to be more competitive, that the team that is on the ice right now is worth being interested in. That was the ultimate message. Like, we're going to be relevant again.
Yeah.
Look at us. What does their marketing team do? Their marketing team builds a campaign around the kid who just got drafted and is playing in Russia right now. I just find there's a disconnect there that maybe if they had some meetings between hockey ops and marketing, that this might have been X-nayed, but it doesn't seem to. If I were playing on the Canadiens right now and I saw this ad, I would just be incensed. I'd be like, what the hell? Like, they're selling season tickets off a kid who's not even here yet? I don't know. It's
No.
just an observation I had.
Yeah. No, I agree. The fact that they center it around Demidov is probably a little bit dubious. The fact that they target that, they put that ad campaign next to an article that says that they've got the best group of under 24 players in the whole league,
Mm-hmm.
to me makes perfect sense, because they
Of
say,
course
hey,
it
look,
does.
it does. It's just the choice of the player that they choose to promote that campaign. Because
I
listen, the
mean,
guys at TSN decided to really pump Cole's tires big
yeah,
time,
big time.
big time. I mean,
Yeah,
they
he's
consider
number one
him
on the list.
a better goal scorer right now than Connor Bedard, which is, I don't get that.
There's been a
But
recency bias there, but yeah, that's fine.
probably, yeah, for sure, for sure. But you could put Cole Caulfield on that ad. It would make perfect sense.
Sure.
The fact that they do
You could put
that promo
Slavkovsky on that
with,
ad. You could even put Hudson on that ad, and it would make perfect
sure,
sense. Like,
but
put
someone
a
who's
guy who's
actually
on the
playing.
team. That's
Yeah,
it. Put a guy who's on the team.
yeah,
And so,
but
yeah, I mean, I get it. Everyone's excited about Demidov, but the whole point of that messaging going into the season, and not to go on and on about it, but and we've talked about this. It wasn't for us, the media, and it wasn't for the fans. It was for their own players. That messaging was targeted to their own players. Like, this is what we want because this is what you want. And so, go out and do that. And this just flies in the face of that. Like, it's just like, I can't wait to see the rebuild episode on this marketing meeting and see how that went next season on Crave. Tune in, everyone. We'll see, we'll see how that ad came to life. But yeah, TSN's list. I mean, to me, it's interesting that they put Caulfield as a double A and not Slavkovsky. And Demidov as a double A, which makes perfect sense. And like, so a double A is Will Smith, double A is Moritz Seider, Lucas Raymond. Like, these are pretty high grade. Luke Hughes, like, pretty high grade players. Matt Boldy, Brock Faber, Steve William from Minnesota, Rashunov. I mean, it's the Canadiens are lacking the triple A, which we've talked about for a long time. I don't disagree with that. I guess Demidov has a chance to be a triple A, but we'll see. And the one other thing that jumped out, and then to me, is you look at the list, and so the four players that are listed as Bs are Michael Hayes, Joshua Roy, Logan Mailloux, and David Reinbacher. And I would argue that each of them, to varying degrees, but each of them have the possibility to quickly move into an A category. Like, they all have that
A
potential.
categories and a first line player.
Right.
So
Is
so
that
you
is that
say I'm
yeah.
a first line player or a first pairing defenseman? I don't know
You
about
don't
any of them,
think?
actually.
Yeah.
Michael Hage as a first line center, that'd be great. That'd be amazing.
Right.
Joshua was a first line winger. Not impossible, but not likely. Logan Mailloux, top pairing defenseman. I don't think so. Reinbacher, too early to tell. I'm very comfortable with those B ratings for those four guys, but it goes to show
Yeah.
the depth of their pool.
Well, I mean, the depth of their pool is never in question, right? And I think, listen, I think they have a great pool, but you look at San Jose right below them. I mean, I gotta say, like, having the AAA prospect makes a big difference. Having
For sure.
Macklin Celebrini at the top of your list, or Connor Bedard at the top of your list, or Jack Hughes at the top of your list, I mean, that to me should have weighed heavier in the balance here. It's great for the Canadiens that they're at the top of this list, but and the depth that they have and the number of A players, great. But I think the teams that have those AAA prospects, that should have been weighed more.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at Chicago's list. Like Chicago has Connor Bedard at AAA, Levshunov at AA, and then a bunch of Bs: Nazar, Korchinski, Moore, Vlasic, Guaver, which is fine. And so, would you take those seven players versus the Canadiens' top seven? So that would be Caulfield, Demidov, Slavkovsky, Hudson, Fowler, Guhle, Hage.
Listen.
I,
I
I
love
would
Connor
simply
Bedard.
because you get Bedard. Like because you get
Yeah,
Bedard, I would take that list. Like it's just because you get him. It just makes all the difference in the world. So that's how I would view it.
yeah. Well, there's no doubt that he's the best player by a mile. But the thing is, after that, a triple A guy, won't be enough to lead you to championships. Surrounding Bedard will be a long term proposition for
Yeah,
Chicago. It's
absolutely.
gonna,
100% it will.
yeah,
100% it will. But the Canadiens are also starting from a different point than Chicago. Chicago tore it down to the studs. So did San Jose. Montreal
for
didn't
sure.
do that. So
No,
it's,
and their highest rated player in that list, Cole Caulfield, was drafted in 2019. So
yeah,
it's his last year of being eligible for that list. And I'll notice something else also. It's a list for under 24, so 23 and under, and Kirby Doc has been omitted from that list altogether. Not
yeah,
even as a B prospect,
yeah.
which
Well,
is
I mean,
which means
that's,
so it
but
means
that's on
that
Doc. That's on Doc to show. I mean, that's injury talking. I mean, it's really like it's Doc has to show that he belongs on this list. He has
yeah.
another year to do it too. He's 22, right? Is he not?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, he's 23. He's the
he's
same
23. Oh
drafted
yeah, he's
same
drafted the same year as Caulfield and Newhook. Actually, Newhook's not on here either.
no, and the Anaheim Ducks are seventh on that rankings, and I noticed that Trevor Zegras has not been listed either.
You know who else
So
hasn't been listed? So the
who?
Seattle Kraken were ranked 20th on this list. They have six players with B ratings or up, and Shane Wright is not one of them.
That's quite a statement.
That's quite something, yeah. I think that's a little harsh. I think it's a little early to
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's you
say that
can
he won't be a second line center in the NHL. I mean, I don't know.
you can
That's
go
that's
through
harsh.
you can go through. I think that there's something that can be seriously argued, at least with one player on every team.
Yeah.
It's so I mean they went through that exercise. It's becoming a yearly exercise that they want to do, a yearly project. Last year the Buffalo Sabres were number one.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily a guarantee of success. The fact that you've got the best pipeline this year. For some reason, the Buffalo Sabres went from number one to number
To
14,
14. Yeah.
all the way down. So they
Well, I
got
mean, I think
guys. Obviously,
they graduated some guys. Yeah.
Rasmus Dahlin graduated, but Dylan Cousins was downgraded from an A to a B. Devin Levi was downgraded from an A to a B also, and
Yeah.
I think that is so it's tough. There's a You were mentioning recency bias. I think that it has a role to play, but obviously at the same time you have to. The clock is ticking for when you have a guy who's 22, 23. It's what are you doing for me now? And when you look
Yeah.
at,
Yeah.
there is also a balance to be found in those lists between teams that have prospects that are mostly 18 or 19 who are still too young, and you're grading them out really of a long-term projection,
Hmm.
And also at the other end of the spectrum, guys that are mostly 22 or 23 that are supposed to be contributors now and are on the way out of that list. So what I find interesting about the Canadiens is that they have a very nice balance of guys that goes really through that whole age group going from 18 to 23, because Demidov's 18, Caulfield's 23, and in between you get guys that are 19, 20, all ages. So
Yeah,
that's healthy.
it is. It is. It's kind of, it does speak to what I think is going to be a tricky game for the Canadians. Like, if you look at Demidov and to a lesser extent Hage and try to project them into the Canadians lineup and where, you know, Ivan Demidov will probably be at the peak of his powers when he's 22 years old, right? Let's say 22, 23, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
That's 4 or 5 years away from now. Caulfield will be 27, as will Doc, as will Newhook. Um, Slav will be 24, but Jake Evans will be in his early 30s. Like it's how are they going to meld all these different windows? Like all the D that they have that are young are going to take longer to develop. We probably won't see the best of Logan Mailloux probably around that same time, like 4 years from now, will be when he's at his best. Reinbacher probably same deal. So are people ready to wait 4 or 5 years before this core really hits its peak and really starts to compete and be good? People are already starting to get impatient now.
Yeah.
Another 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, but you assume that guys like Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Guhle, you mentioned New Hook and Doc, technically, I would assume they're only going to get better from this point on.
They should,
So
absolutely.
we've
But
seen. I mean, it's not going to be a straight arrow up, but at the same time, we've seen the worst from that team.
right, but I think when you look at a guy like Justin Barron, for instance, you look at even Mayu this season, like I think everyone expected Mayu to be playing in Montreal right now. Didn't happen. And that's nothing against
I
him.
did
And
not. I don't know who did, but I did not.
you didn't you didn't think going into training camp that he had a very good shot of making it to the team?
Nope.
Really?
No.
Okay. Well, good for
No.
you. I think you were one of the only ones. I think the organization had an expectation that he would make the team. They were hoping for it. Didn't work out. But there's some of these guys are not going to hit, I guess is my point. So
Yeah, yeah, because I'm sure that I don't think that it existed back in the day when Barron was an Avalanche draft choice, but there must have been a time where
he was on this
Justin
list.
Barron would have been a B,
Of
you know.
course. For sure.
So
I think that time, well, that time is not necessarily, I mean, he's not a B on this list right now, but it's his career's not over, but he's definitely showing
no,
that he's definitely showing that there are pitfalls, and sometimes guys just can't make that last step. It's
yeah.
either takes longer or just never happens. So I think Joshua was sitting in that spot right now. He's got to figure out how to take that next step, and some consistent performance in Laval would allow for him to reintegrate the team in Montreal at some point. Would probably be best for him if that were to happen sometime in the next month or two. Um, but yeah, it's just something worth keeping in mind. Not everyone's going to hit the NHL and thrive like Lane Hudson has.
So
It's
what? So what do you think this team needs the most at this point? Do they need just another? Okay, well, of course, any team could use a triple A prospect, but do you think that they need another double A prospect no matter the position? Do they need to make sure that they draft another centerman, or that they have a amongst their wealth of young defensemen, that they have a guy who for sure can play on their first pairing?
no, I think yeah. Well, for sure, no. There's no one for sure. I mean, listen, you could do worse than having Kaiden Guhle on your top pairing. Like that's, I think he's going to be he's a fine top pairing defenseman. He's a good shutdown mobile guy. You would ideally have someone next to him who could complement him and be sort of the puck carrier on that pairing. Lane Hudson, maybe eventually. perhaps. One of them would have to play on the right, which is not ideal. Again, um, is Reinbacher that guy? It's gonna be hard to say for another 2, 3 years before we actually see what he can become. But if he finds the version of himself that the entire hockey world kind of fell in love with his draft year, maybe. But yeah, there's no surefire bet as to who's going to be on your first pairing. So if you're in a position to draft a guy like Schaefer, I'd say you go for it. And if Doc turns out to not take to the position of center this season, which I'll repeat for the 4,000th time, they need to find out very soon, then yeah, then you'd be inclined to take a center. And if you're in a position to draft a guy like Misa at fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, wherever they're drafting, then maybe you do that. Maybe they are like I thought coming out of last year's draft that they were done drafting for positional organizational need. But they might still be in that position. I think they are missing a surefire stud top pair defenseman. And if Doc doesn't work out in the middle, then there's a big hole there as well. So
yeah, but the guy that they would draft if he
I
was a
know
centerman
would
in
be
order to
5 years
fill
away
that.
from his prime.
That's it.
Yeah,
He's far away. So you
yeah,
just
yeah.
go with the best player available now, and you
I
try to
mean,
address that other need through a trade because you've got and you balance it out with all those kids that are there
well,
and
it
try
depends on where
to
they're
money.
drafting, right? I mean, if they're drafting top five again, then you should go with best player available. But if they're drafting early teens or around 10, I think you can go more towards positional need than you would higher in the draft, my opinion. I mean,
Yeah, but
if they
I
have a
don't
if
think
they
that
have
in
like
the
a
early teens you wouldn't get the sentiment that you're missing
right, but if
in
you're
the
if you're
early
picking in
teens.
the early teens and you have the possibility, and listen, I don't know who would be available in the early teens. I haven't done my draft prep yet because it's only November. But if there was like a smallish winger, scoring winger available, and he's the best player available at 12,
Yeah.
I mean, do you take him when you already have Caulfield and Demidov and Newhook? I guess if you want to include him in that group, but you have two smaller scoring wingers already that you have penciled in to your top two lines, if not your top line. Do you take another
Oh,
one?
I'm no, I'm sure that size is going to be a big factor
So
in the
then,
list.
so then you're already factoring things other than best player available. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think best player available is a myth. It's not an actual thing. There's always preferences that teams have for various needs, playing styles, builds, handedness. There's all sorts of factors that go into it that make best player available a very pretty subjective judgment, and but that's subject to what you already have in your organization and what you need in your organization. That
Yeah,
that always comes into play
the BPA is actually BPA
for you.
FU. It's
Yeah,
best player available for us. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, in that sense, I'd say yeah, always take best player available, but your organizational needs are baked into that. So let's see how the Canadians do. But anyhow, it's good to see the Canadians at the top of this list, but it's it's still an imperfect list. It's very promising, and there's a lot to look forward to. The future is bright, as the Canadians are saying in this ad I'm looking at. Be ready! Exclamation point. Join the season tickets waiting list. And there's a picture of a smiling Ivan Demidov. So what? Who am I to argue?
I
I
don't
can't
want to be
argue. I
too
can't
smart.
argue with the ad.
No, 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 for sure, for sure. But I mean, their two best prospects based on that list are wingers. It's not ideal. You'd like a center to be there instead of two wingers.
Minnesota's doing all right.
Yeah,
He's a hell of a
true.
player, man. I mean, honestly, like that's a guy you can build a team around. Like Minnesota hasn't done a great job building a team around him, but you can build a team around a player like that. You can build a team around Artemi Panarin. Well, I think the Rangers are showing that. It's like it can be done.
Yeah, but they've got they've got top 3 goalie in the league, and they've got a Norris Trophy
Yeah,
defenseman also. So you got 3 good parts there.
I get it, but
So
who's their best player?
no, it's Panarin.
Yeah. So you could build around. Yes, of course, you need other good players, but I mean,
No,
it's
actually, you know
it's.
what? Their best. No, I would say their best player is Chesterkin.
I would disagree. Only because
It,
Shesterkin plays 55 games a year.
oh well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But interesting exercise. Congratulations to Craig Button and Chris Peters, because whether you agree or disagree, there's always a lot of work that goes into these things when you have to sit down and assess guys and project guys from all 32 teams.
Mhm.
It's hard enough to try to read through the tea leaves when it comes to one organization. They've tried to do it for all 32, and it's interesting after to compare it also with our buddies at the Athletic are doing, because in the off season in August, Corey Pronman is doing his pipeline ranking.
Mhm.
So it's the rankings were a bit different. He placed Chicago first,
Well,
and
he puts heavy weight on the AAA prospects.
yeah,
Heavy weight. And I would tend to agree with that methodology, but I could see doing it this way, the value of this as well. But for
yeah.
sure, Corey puts a lot of weight on whether you have uh, an elite player in your system or not.
And this is such Corey, elite. The comma between the two elite is so
Yes.
Corey. It's so Corey.
Yeah.
So yeah, in his listing from August, Canadiens were sixth.
Hmm.
Maybe that if he tried to do that mid-season, like in season like that, he would maybe bump the Canadiens a spot or two. But yeah, I know that the methodology and the onus is placed maybe in different parts. But all in all, when you look at the fact that the Canadiens started their rebuild after their rivals in the Atlantic Division, we started the show by talking about the standings where the Canadiens didn't really were lagging behind those teams now,
Hmm.
and they end up having that sort of prospect pool. They could be in a worse shape.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I honestly would not trade places with either Detroit or Buffalo right now.
Yeah.
Ottawa, I'm still kind of waiting and seeing what happens there, but all three of them are in a real precarious spot in terms of their rebuild and in terms of their fans' patience with that rebuild and in terms of just the level of scrutiny on everything they've done. I mean, Detroit's seemingly on the verge of firing their coach, especially with one that just became available. That's looking so good. And Ottawa just replaced their coach and their GM, and Buffalo's Buffalo. It's its own thing, it's its own animal. But the frustration there is verging on the fact that it hasn't turned into apathy is such a credit to the Buffalo Sabres fan base. Like they are the best fan base to me in the league. They have tolerated the most garbage that
Yeah.
any fan base could be handed, and they're still there. They're not there in as many numbers as they were before, but the fact that enough of them are there, they've been through so much. Hats off to the Buffalo Sabres fans. The Buffalo Sabres, I don't take my hat off to, but the fans, I do.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wish everybody a very good weekend. If you are not a subscriber to the Basu and Godin podcast, we invite you to do so. The Basu and Godin Notebook, that's the full name of our podcast. You can go to basuandgodin.com where we have different offers as to become a paid subscriber. We have a monthly subscription, we have a yearly subscription. You can become one of our generous founding members.
Shout
So
out to our founding members. We had our Google Meet last night. It was a lot of fun.
a lot of fun.
A lot of
Yeah,
fun discussion. So we do that every month with our founding members. And just a note, if you're a yearly member and you want to upgrade to a founding member, you can do that. Nothing's
sure.
stopping you. So if you want to be part of the monthly Google Meet, last night's was a lot of fun. A lot of good discussion, a lot of good points. I always come out of there thinking I've enjoyed the discourse, and it's I've gotten some ideas out of it and some things I hadn't thought of from that perspective. So that happened again last night. Thank you to all our members who attended. Um, and yeah, if you want to join that, then the founding tier is there for you. But otherwise, if you just want to hear us talk twice a week, monthly or yearly is good for that. So
Yeah,
BasuandGodin.com.
and I'm the biggest subscriber of them all. I hear you talk every freaking day. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye
Feel
bye.
all warm and fuzzy inside.